So this is Taylor Mason, and I'm here today with Representative Carol Hill Evans. This is an ongoing oral history project on the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, diversity in the House, and its impact on members and staff. Thank you so much for taking time to do this interview today.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives.
Oh, okay. I am a resident of York City, York County. I represent the 95th Legislative District here in York County. I am a retiree from Caterpillar. I served prior to coming to the House of Representatives. I served for 9 years on York City Council. I started off my first 4 years as vice president and then was elected to be president and served 5 years as president of council. I had no idea that I was going to be a politician. It's not what I started off to be, but as a result of having worked for the city of York and meeting so many of the residents in my position there, I was a neighborhood resource specialist. And so I would go around and talk to all the established neighborhood associations, bring their concerns back to the mayor. We would come up with resolutions and resources, and then I would take those back out into the community. And as a result of that, I got name and face recognition and trust that people, trusted that I was going to get back with them, that I was going to do the best that I could on their behalf. So when the position of city council came open, I and a friend of mine, Genevieve Ray, we decided that we were going to run, and we were going to run on civility, because at the time the city council was in disarray. complete disarray. So we ran and we won. And so we went on to serve. She served for 1 term. I served for 2. And then the beginning of my 3rd term is when I was elected to the State House. So that said, my predecessor had decided after the primary that he was going to take another position. And so then I had to be appointed to be on the ballot, and I won. And so I came on the ballot for the general election in 2016, was elected, and then sworn in for my first term as the House of Representatives in 2017. Okay.
So looking at your district history, you are the first African-American to represent your district. What has that experience been like? Do you think race had any role in getting elected in a positive or negative way? If you could just elaborate on anything like that.
Do I think it had? I think maybe, perhaps within the African-American community, because I was on city council and I did know so many people here, and having been born and raised here, I still had that familiarity with lots of families, generational families. My mother at the time was still living, and so all of her friends knew who I was. Their children and I grew up together, went to school together, and then our children, grew up in the same way. And so I think in that regard, in that respect, because of the community of York, I do believe that it had something to do with it. The fact that I was African American, being the first in this position, kind of came as an afterthought, because I was not running on that, and I didn't even truly recognize that I was the first. I knew I was the first female, and therefore probably the first African American, just as I was on city council, the first African American female to serve in that capacity. So it's part of my path. It's what was on my path. And so I'm following my path, and here we are.
Yeah. And being in the House, particularly being a person of color, do you think that there's extra work ethic involved in getting legislation passed or speaking on the House floor, or any committee work? Do you think there's extra work that's involved with that?
I think it's extra work on the individual. So for me, work ethic is extremely important. Both my parents had very strong work ethics, and that's how we were raised, and that was our expectation. I had retired from Caterpillar prior to my going into on city council, had gone back to school to get my degree, then went to work because working was just, it's what you did, right? So I went to work for Harley Davidson for 9 years. And it was during that time that I became even more interested in working. And so work ethic is very important. As far as the House of Representatives, I think that we are looked at in a certain way. And even though I personally have always held myself in a way that I was respectful and respected. And so that just goes along with the work ethic. And so I believe in that way, I have expectations of myself, of what I need to do and how I need to be as an African-American female and a representative of my area. Because the district, and this is probably jumping ahead, but my district is not comprised of a majority African-Americans. It's very minimal. I think we are at, just in the city of York, I believe is like 8% maybe, 8% African-American. And district-wide is maybe 11. And so I feel like I need to be representing everyone. And so I represent everyone the same. I'm just me. I do me.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I did not know that about York in terms of the makeup, but what kind of issues are important to your constituents? Do they align with issues that maybe the Black Caucus or other members are taking up at the time right now?
Some of the issues I think are common issues across the Commonwealth, regardless of race makeup. But of course, I would be, foolish to ignore the fact that so many of our criminal justice reform is specific for the Black Caucus to affect the change within our communities, our Black and Brown communities, regardless of where they are within the Commonwealth. And so that in itself has been an amazing experience for me, because as I said, yes, we have issues here in York, but they're not at the magnitude as like Philadelphia or and so serving on the Black Caucus has opened my eyes to so many things that I just wasn't aware of, simply because we haven't had to deal with them on a racial issue. Like criminal justice is criminal justice, but that's not the case. It's, my eyes were open to the fact that so much and so many, even though I kind of knew it, I just didn't know to what degree. And so being able to bring in speakers when we have our meetings and hearing the concerns of my colleagues from their different areas is really, truly eye-opening. And so that's been a great experience. It's given me a whole new perspective on things that actually are important, that are really important to people, and how those issues are impacting their lives. Things such as just license suspension, justice in terms of drugs, other crimes, gun laws, things like that, that are just not conducive to being African-American and getting the same fair judgment as those who are non-African-American or Black and Brown.
Okay, well, that's a good segue then into the Black Caucus itself. So in your involvement with your service, I know you've been secretary a few terms. So what is your involvement with the caucus itself?
Well, initially when I took the position, it was, I don't want to say in name only, but it kind of was in name only, because there was very little that I felt I needed to do as secretary, and there was no defined just position, in terms of responsibilities. And then this current term, there was a phone call in which many of the freshmen were a little miffed over the fact that they felt like the Black Caucus as an organization should have done more for them. And so I felt like, well, that's what I need to do. As secretary, I need to know that when freshmen are coming in, what is their area? What are their issues? What are their concerns? Why did they run? Who are they? And just be more welcoming. And so I took it upon myself to do during the summertime when we were out of session. I went and visited the districts of the then incoming freshmen. And again, eye-opening to know that, what their districts look like. You hear about certain things that are happening in Philadelphia. And it turns out that the freshmen were from Philadelphia, Reading. I think that was it, just Philadelphia and Reading. And so I went to Reading with Rep. Guzman. That again was eye-opening. As many times as I've been to Reading, he showed me places and parts that I didn't even know existed that have been there for many, many years. And his gems and yet his challenges, right? And the same thing for Reps. Parker and Young, and all of the other freshmen that I went to see. And I just had just an experience that was more, it made me feel more part of the Black Caucus. It made me feel like I actually had purpose as a secretary. And I think I hope it helped our freshmen to know that, someone in the executive part of the Black Caucus, is there, that's not part of their area, is willing to come and see their area and learn more about their areas. And then I can take those things back to my community and say, hey, if we think we have it bad, we don't have it bad. Let me tell you about what's going on in North Philly or West Philly, or if we think that we have this part so good, let me tell you what I saw in Reading. Let me tell you what I saw, in North Philly. And so it's just a way of really bringing different communities together. And I think as a result of my being there, then the freshmen were more willing to come to my area, which I've been inviting all along. And they actually took the time then to come to see what my area is like. So now they can take that back to their communities. And so it's just been one of camaraderie. It's been one of, we don't always agree on everything. Issues are different across the Commonwealth, and yet we try to find the commonalities and then hone in on those to make changes as we can.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've not heard that in any of my interviews yet about visiting a whole lot different districts. But so in terms of maybe current Black Caucus members or former, or even people outside the caucus, did you have any mentors when you got to the House? People who steered you in the right direction and how to pass bills and things like that?
I'd have to say that would be Rep. Steve Kinsey. Okay. Although everyone, just welcomed me with open arms, and it was just very refreshing. And of course, I had a mentor that I sat beside on the floor, and that was Representative Pyshinsky, and he was helping me through many of the times when I would say, well, why would you vote that way? Or how are you going to vote? And, and it was a lot of times it was like, you just need to think about your district and vote your district, because that's the most important thing. And so it was an opportunity to learn. Rep. Kinsey was a little more hands-on, as he was at the time, right after Rep. Harris. Then he became the president of the Black Caucus, and he brought in speakers. I think we had meetings probably more often, and so it was an opportunity to really learn. But yeah, he kind of took me under his wing, and well, this is how this works, and I feel your passion, and I understand, but you have to consider this, And so he served as a great mentor. It continues to serve as a great mentor even now.
I've met both of those members, and both very nice. I've met both. Rep. Kinsey was actually the first one I interviewed, so I'm glad you mentioned him then. So what are some legislative issues the Black Caucus itself has had to work on in the past, and what do you hope to see in future sessions?
In the past, I think the biggest ones are the ones that we actually got passed, which is the two, and I'm really bad about numbers, so
it's okay.
but they were two that we passed that were criminal justice reform. bills, and it was huge, and it was historic, and it makes you feel like, wow, yeah, with all this power. When I say power, I mean power with numbers, making those connections, having those conversations, talking to different people, keeping our ears, open, listening to our constituents, and then coming up with legislation that can then be bipartisan and agreed to and signed into law. And that was a process. Going through that process it was enormous for me. It was just like, oh my goodness, I was actually part of that, right? So yeah, it's a good feeling. So criminal justice will always and continues to be a huge issue for the Black Caucus. Education, fair funding for our education is huge. Minimum wage increase is huge. The passing legalization of marijuana is huge. And just like workforce development, I think all the things that impact the economy, that impact the Commonwealth, when you drill down, it has an even bigger impact on our Black and Brown communities. And so I think that gives us the opportunity to really focus on those issues that are going to equalize opportunities across Pennsylvania.
Okay. So my last question then for you, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe you have a little bit more to add. So how has your service with the Black Caucus impacted your overall House service so far?
Only in that it's made me, so before I visited the different areas and before, I don't know, all right, so let me just say, it has impacted it that I can now understand, because I've seen with my own eyes some of the challenges and some of the issues. And there were times when I would hear some of my colleagues from either Philly or Pittsburgh that would stand up and make statements and, really kind of, pound the podium with passion. And I really didn't get it because I didn't have that same experience. And now, even though I don't have the experience, I at least have the vision and I have the visual of what it is they're talking about, because I've seen it with my own eyes. And I've seen the changes that they are making within their communities to try to make improvements. And so that impacts me because it gives me the courage, it gives me the will, it gives me the passion to want to do those kinds of things in my own community. And I would not have had that because even on all the committees that I serve on, serving, in the Black Caucus has just given me a different perspective.
Yeah. Maybe another question for you too is, if someone who comes from one of these areas you visited, what would you say to them if they wanted to run for public office in the future?
They're already in public office, my colleagues.
If someone wants to run for public office in the future and they're coming from one of these underprivileged communities, what advice?
Go for it. I say go for it. Raise your hand and get involved. I say that to everybody. Raise your hand, get involved, find a mentor, somebody who can guide you, someone who can, I don't want to say give you the right answers, because you have to find your own answers, but someone that's brutally honest with you, that can tell you you are so on the wrong path, or that can be your cheerleader and say, hey, you nailed it. That's important. A lot of times you don't know if you're doing the right thing. You don't know if what you did is right, if your vote was correct, if you should have voted some other way. And so that's what I saw when I first came in. But getting there, that's personal. I think that's a personal thing. I would say, if you want to try it, because I say everybody should do something, should have some kind of public service, because it really does give you a whole different perspective on just generally life, and appreciating outside of yourself what other people have gone through, are going through, and may go through in the future. And so but public service it's not for sissies. And if you have thin skin, you might want to rethink it. But you have to build a thick skin. You have to take it personally without allowing it to become personal. That makes sense.
It does.
And so for me, I never saw myself as a public servant. But here I am, and I love it. I mean, it's very tough, but it's very rewarding. It's very challenging, and there's never a dull moment. And you can find times when you're actually, you actually enjoy the public when you're out in the public. The best thing for me are the children. When the children, because I go into the schools a lot. So when the children say, oh, she was at our school, and they actually remember, it's like, wow, what an impact. And I'm telling them, get involved, do something, start a club, even if it's you and your next door neighbor, build your community, identify what your community is, whether it's in your house, in your neighborhood, in your block, or in your church, in your park, whatever it is, identify that community and then go for it. And if you can do that and you're still driven to do more, then try public service. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was my last question, unless there's anything you'd like to add or discuss. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time to do this.